The morning of my brother Jake's wedding dawned crisp and clear in Napa Valley, California, with the kind of golden light that made everything look like a fairy tale. The vineyard where Jake and his fiancée Elena were getting married was picture perfect. Rolling hills covered in autumn vines, elegant white tents set up on the manicured lawn, and flowers everywhere in shades of burgundy and cream. I'd been looking forward to this day for months. As Jake's older sister and the family's unofficial event coordinator, I'd helped with everything from choosing the venue to organizing the seating chart. More importantly, this was going to be the first time in over a year that our entire extended family would be together, including relatives flying in from across the country. My husband Michael and I had driven up from Los Angeles the day before, checking into the charming bed and breakfast that Jake had recommended for out-of-town guests. At 34, Michael was the emergency room physician at Cedars-Sinai, and I was a high school English teacher. We'd been married for 6 years, and while his demanding schedule often kept us busy, I was grateful he'd been able to take the weekend off for Jake's wedding. "This place is incredible," Michael said as we walked through the vineyard that morning, both of us dressed for the ceremony. He looked handsome in his navy suit, and I felt elegant in the burgundy dress I'd chosen to complement the wedding colors. Jake and Elena really outdid themselves. I squeezed his arm, feeling happy and relaxed in a way I hadn't in months. Between my teaching schedule and Michael's unpredictable hospital shifts, we rarely had time for romantic getaways or family events like this. "I'm just so glad you could be here. I know how hard it was to get Dr. Martinez to cover your weekend shift." Michael smiled and kissed my forehead. I wouldn't miss Jake's wedding. Besides, when's the last time we had a weekend away together? The ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock, giving us time to enjoy the vineyard's wine tasting and mingle with family members we hadn't seen in ages. My cousin Sarah had flown in from Boston with her 2 teenagers, my Uncle Robert and Aunt Linda had driven down from Portland, and even my grandmother's sister Helen, who was 87 and rarely traveled anymore, had made the trip from Arizona. "Claire!" My mother appeared at my elbow, looking radiant in her mother-of-the-groom dress. At 58, Mom still had the energy of someone half her age, and she'd been in full wedding planning mode for months. "Have you seen the centerpieces? Elena's florist really outdid herself. And wait until you see Jake in his tuxedo. He looks so handsome I almost started crying during the photos." I laughed, feeling the infectious joy that had been building all week. "Mom, you're going to cry through the entire ceremony, aren't you?" "Probably," she admitted with a grin. "I can't help it. My baby boy is getting married to the most wonderful girl. Did I tell you Elena's parents insisted on paying for the rehearsal dinner? Such lovely people. We're so lucky to be gaining her as a daughter." Michael and I spent the afternoon catching up with relatives, touring the vineyard's wine cellar, and watching Jake and Elena pose for what seemed like hundreds of pre-ceremony photos. Jake looked happier than I'd ever seen him, and Elena was absolutely glowing in her vintage-inspired lace dress. As 4 o'clock approached, guests began making their way to the ceremony space, a stunning outdoor setting with the vineyard's rolling hills as a backdrop. White chairs were arranged in neat rows facing an arch covered in burgundy dahlias and trailing greenery. The late afternoon sun cast everything in warm, golden light that made the whole scene look like something from a magazine. Michael and I found our seats in the 3rd row, right behind my parents and Elena's immediate family. I could see Dad trying to discreetly wipe his eyes as the string quartet began playing, and Mom reaching over to squeeze his hand. This was exactly the kind of family moment I'd been hoping for, all of us together, celebrating love and new beginnings. The processional began with Elena's bridesmaids walking down the aisle in their flowing burgundy dresses. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Elena appeared at the back of the aisle on her father's arm, looking absolutely radiant. The collective sigh from the guests was audible, and I felt tears spring to my own eyes. Jake's face when he saw his bride was everything you could hope for in a groom. Pure joy, pure love, pure amazement that this incredible woman had chosen to spend her life with him. Even Michael, who wasn't usually emotional at weddings, squeezed my hand and whispered, "They're perfect together." The ceremony was beautiful and personal, with vows that Jake and Elena had written themselves. Elena's voice shook with emotion as she promised to love Jake through all of life's adventures, and Jake's vows included a funny story about how Elena had won him over by beating him at trivia night at their local bar. Everyone was laughing and crying and completely caught up in the romance of the moment. But just as the officiant was asking for the rings, I felt Michael's phone buzz against his leg. He'd put it on silent for the ceremony, but I could feel the vibration through his suit pocket. Then it buzzed again, and again. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and I could see him fighting the urge to check his phone. As an ER doctor, he was used to being on call even during personal time, but he'd specifically arranged coverage for this weekend. The buzzing continued, insistent and urgent. "Dr. Thompson, do you take Elena to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the officiant was saying, and Jake's face was radiant as he said, I do. Michael's phone buzzed again, and this time he couldn't ignore it. He carefully pulled it from his pocket and glanced at the screen, his face immediately changing from relaxed enjoyment to sharp concern. Elena, do you take Jake to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, Elena said, her voice clear and joyful. Michael leaned over and whispered urgently in my ear, Claire, we have to leave, right now. I stared at him in shock. What? Michael, they're literally about to be pronounced husband and wife. I know, but this is an emergency. A real emergency. We have to go. The officiant was raising his hands with a huge smile. By the power vested in me by the state of California, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jake, you may kiss your bride. The entire wedding party erupted in cheers and applause as Jake and Elena shared their first kiss as a married couple, but I was frozen in my seat, staring at my husband's stricken face. Michael, what kind of emergency? What's happening? But Michael was already standing up, his face pale and serious in a way that made my stomach drop. Claire, I'll explain in the car, but we need to leave right now. This can't wait. As Jake and Elena walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, beaming and laughing and stopping to hug family members, I found myself being pulled away from the celebration by my husband, who looked like he'd just received the worst news of his life. Whatever had happened, it was about to change everything. Michael grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the back of the ceremony space as guests continued applauding Jake and Elena's first kiss. I stumbled behind him, my mind racing with confusion and growing panic. Michael, stop! I hissed, trying to keep my voice down as we reached the edge of the crowd. You can't just drag me away from my brother's wedding without explaining what's happening. He turned to face me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. A mixture of professional urgency and personal devastation that made my blood run cold. Claire, that was Dr. Martinez calling from the hospital. There's been an accident. An accident? What kind of accident? Why does that concern us right now? Michael's hands were shaking as he put his phone back in his pocket. It's Emma, Claire. Your niece, Emma. She's been in a car accident, and she's in critical condition at UCLA Medical Center. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Emma. My brother David's 8-year-old daughter. The little girl with pigtails and gap-toothed grin who called me Aunt Claire and always wanted to hear stories about my students. What do you mean critical condition? I whispered. She was in the car with David's ex-wife Karen when another driver ran a red light and T-boned them. Karen has minor injuries, but Emma... Michael's voice broke. She has severe head trauma and internal bleeding. They're prepping her for emergency surgery right now. I felt my knees go weak. Where's David? He's already at the hospital. He's been trying to reach you for the past hour, but your phone was on silent for the ceremony. I looked back at the celebration, where Jake and Elena were posed for photos with the wedding party. Everyone laughing and hugging and completely unaware that my 8-year-old niece was fighting for her life 200 miles away. We have to tell my parents, I said, my voice sounding strange and distant. Claire, maybe we should... No, Michael. We have to tell them now. This is their granddaughter. I walked back toward the family section on unsteady legs, Michael following close behind. My parents were still in their seats, beaming with joy as they watched Jake and Elena pose with the wedding party. Mom was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, overwhelmed with happiness. Mom, Dad, I said quietly, touching Mom's shoulder. I need to talk to you both, right now. Something in my tone made them both turn around immediately, their expressions shifting from joy to concern. Claire, what's wrong? Dad asked. I knelt down beside their chairs, aware that other family members nearby might overhear. There's been an accident. Emma's been hurt badly. She's in surgery at UCLA Medical Center right now. The change in my parents' faces was instant and devastating. Mom's hand flew to her mouth and Dad went completely pale. How badly? Mom whispered. Severe head trauma and internal bleeding. David's at the hospital. Michael and I are driving down there right now. Oh my God, Mom breathed. Our little Emma. Dad was already standing up, his face set in grim determination. We're coming with you. Dad, no. This is Jake's wedding day. You can't leave. Claire, Emma is our granddaughter. Of course we're leaving. But Jake and Elena, they'll be devastated if you leave during their reception. This is their special day. Mom stood up beside Dad, her face torn between anguish and uncertainty. What do we do? How do we choose between our children? The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Behind us, the reception was beginning as guests moved toward the tented area where dinner would be served. Jake and Elena were still taking photos, completely oblivious to the crisis unfolding just yards away. You stay, I said firmly. Michael and I will go to the hospital and keep you updated. Jake doesn't need to know about this until after his honeymoon. There's nothing he can do anyway, and it would destroy his wedding day. But Emma... Mom started, is in the best possible hands at UCLA. Michael knows the trauma team there personally. We'll call you the minute we know anything. Dad looked back at Jake, who was laughing as Elena fed him a piece of wedding cake during the photos. Then he looked at me, his face etched with pain. Are you sure about this? Are you sure we shouldn't tell him? I'm sure. Emma would want Jake to have his perfect wedding day. When she wakes up, she'll want to hear all about it. I said when, not if, because I couldn't bear to consider any other possibility. Michael was already pulling out his phone to call the hospital for an update. Dr. Rodriguez is the lead trauma surgeon, he told me. Emma's in excellent hands. I hugged my parents quickly, feeling their bodies trembling with suppressed panic. We'll call you every hour with updates, I promise. As Michael and I hurried toward the parking lot, I could hear the wedding band starting their first set and guests laughing and celebrating. My brother's perfect day was continuing exactly as planned, while we raced toward the worst night of our family's life. The contrast felt surreal, joy and terror existing simultaneously, separated by just a few hundred yards, and the terrible knowledge that everything could change in an instant. The 3-hour drive to UCLA Medical Center felt endless. Michael drove while I called David repeatedly, trying to get updates on Emma's condition. His voice was hollow when he finally answered. Claire, thank God. Where are you? We're an hour out. How is she? Still in surgery. It's been 4 hours. They said the next few hours are critical. I could hear the exhaustion and terror in my brother's voice. David and Karen had divorced 2 years ago, but they were both at the hospital, united in their fear for their daughter. David, we didn't tell Jake. We couldn't ruin his wedding day. Good. Emma would want him to be happy. She loves weddings. The use of present tense gave me hope. When we arrived at the hospital, I found David in the surgical waiting room, still wearing the clothes he'd put on for what should have been a normal Saturday with his daughter. His face was haggard, and Karen sat beside him, her arm in a sling but otherwise uninjured. Any news? Michael asked, immediately switching into his professional doctor mode. Dr. Rodriguez came out an hour ago. They've stopped the internal bleeding, but there's still swelling in her brain. They're monitoring the pressure. Michael nodded grimly. Rodriguez is the best pediatric trauma surgeon on the West Coast. If anyone can save her, he can. I called Mom every hour as promised. Each conversation was a careful balance of hope and honesty. How is she? Still stable, still sleeping. The doctors say that's normal after this type of surgery. I could hear the wedding reception continuing in the background of Mom's calls. Music, laughter, celebration. The surreal contrast never stopped feeling wrong. At midnight, Dr. Rodriguez finally emerged from the surgical area. His scrubs were stained, his face exhausted but cautiously optimistic. The surgery went well. We've relieved the pressure on her brain, and all her vitals are stable. The next 24 hours will tell us more about potential neurological damage. Can we see her? David asked. Family only, one at a time, and only for a few minutes. David went first, then Karen. When my turn came, I wasn't prepared for how small Emma looked surrounded by machines and tubes. Her face was swollen beyond recognition, but she was breathing on her own. Hey, Em, I whispered, taking her tiny hand. Uncle Jake got married today. You would have loved the flowers. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Jake asking where you are. What should I tell him? I stepped outside Emma's room to call her. Mom, tell him Michael had a family emergency. Something vague. Claire, this is getting harder. He keeps asking if everything's okay. Is the reception still going? They're cutting the cake now. Jake looks so happy. I closed my eyes, torn between wanting to protect my brother's joy and needing my family's support. Give me one more day, Mom. If Emma's stable tomorrow, we'll tell him then. But as I hung up, I wondered if I was making the right choice. Emma lay unconscious. David was falling apart, and I was orchestrating an elaborate deception to preserve one perfect wedding day. Dr. Rodriguez approached me in the hallway. Are you the aunt? Yes. Your niece is a fighter. Her brain activity is good. Her responses are encouraging. I'm optimistic. For the first time in 12 hours, I felt like I could breathe. When will we know for sure? If she wakes up tomorrow and shows normal cognitive function, she'll likely make a full recovery. If she wakes up. The words hung between us like a prayer and a plea. That night, Michael and I took turns sitting with Emma while David tried to rest. At dawn, as I held her hand and whispered stories about her cousins and her school friends, her fingers twitched. Then her eyes fluttered open. Aunt Claire? She whispered, her voice hoarse but clear. I started crying so hard I could barely speak. Hi, sweetheart. You're okay. You're going to be okay. Emma was going to live. She was going to recover. And Jake's wedding had been perfect. Sometimes the hardest decisions turn out to be the right ones. Emma's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. Within 48 hours, she was sitting up in bed, asking for chocolate ice cream and complaining about the hospital gown. The doctors were amazed by her resilience. And by day 3, they were talking about releasing her home within the week. Jake and Elena were still on their honeymoon in Hawaii, completely unaware of the crisis that had unfolded during their reception. I knew I had to tell them, but I wanted Emma to be fully recovered first. On Tuesday morning, I finally made the call. "Claire, perfect timing." Jake's voice was bright and relaxed. "We were just about to go snorkeling. How's everything at home?" Mom said Michael had some family emergency during the reception. I took a deep breath. "Jake, I need to tell you something important. Can you and Elena sit down?" The tone in my voice immediately sobered him. "What's wrong?" "Emma was in a car accident during your wedding reception. A serious accident." The silence on the other end was deafening. "What do you mean during our reception?" "Claire, that was 4 days ago. Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Because she was in surgery, and there was nothing you could do, and I couldn't bear the thought of ruining your perfect wedding day." "Ruining my— Claire, she's my niece. She's family. How could you not tell me?" I heard Elena's voice in the background asking what was wrong, then Jake explaining the situation. "Jake, please listen. Emma is going to be completely fine. She's awake, she's talking, she's asking for McDonald's chicken nuggets. The doctors say she'll make a full recovery." "But she could have died, Claire. She could have died while I was cutting wedding cake." "But she didn't die, and you got to have the most beautiful, joyful wedding day without the shadow of this hanging over it. Emma was unconscious the whole time. She never would have known you weren't there." "That's not the point. The point is that our family was in crisis and nobody told me." I could hear the hurt and anger in his voice, and I understood it. But I also knew I'd make the same choice again. "Jake, do you remember how happy you looked during your ceremony? How Elena glowed when she walked down the aisle? Do you remember dancing with Mom and how Dad cried during your vows?" "Of course I remember. If we'd told you about Emma, would you have been able to feel that joy? Would you have been able to focus on Elena, on your marriage, on celebrating your love?" Another long pause. "No," he admitted quietly. "I would have been on the first plane to Los Angeles." "Exactly. And Elena's family flew in from Spain. Your college friends came from across the country. That perfect day happened because everyone you love was there, celebrating without any shadows or fear or worry." Elena took the phone. "Claire, is Emma really okay?" "She's more than okay. She's already asking when Uncle Jake is coming to visit so she can hear about the wedding cake." "We're coming home," Elena said firmly. "Today. We're cutting the honeymoon short." "Elena, you don't have to." "Yes, we do. Family comes first." When they arrived at the hospital the next evening, Jake went straight to Emma's room. I watched through the window as he sat beside her bed, holding her hand while she excitedly told him about the nurses and the really good Jell-O and how she'd gotten to ride in an ambulance. "Did you have the best wedding ever, Uncle Jake?" "I did, Em. The very best." "Good. Aunt Claire said you looked really handsome and Elena looked like a princess." Jake glanced at me through the window, and I saw something in his expression shift, understanding, maybe even gratitude. Later, in the hospital corridor, he pulled me aside. "I was angry at first," he said. "Really angry that you kept this from me. I know, I understand why. But watching Emma just now, seeing how excited she is to hear about the wedding, I think you made the right choice." "I hope so." "Claire, Emma almost died. And my last memory before that happened is the happiest day of my life. If you told me about the accident, my wedding day would forever be associated with fear and trauma. Instead, it's exactly what it should be. Pure joy." I felt tears starting to form. I was so scared I was wrong. "You weren't wrong. You protected both Emma and my marriage in the only way you could. You gave us both the gift of unmarked happiness." Jake hugged me tightly. "Thank you for making an impossible choice so I didn't have to." 3 weeks later, Emma was fully recovered and back to her normal 8-year-old chaos. At Jake and Elena's post-honeymoon family dinner, she regaled everyone with dramatic retellings of her adventure at the hospital. And then Aunt Claire told me about Uncle Jake's wedding while I was sleeping, and I dreamed about dancing with all of you. Jake caught my eye across the table and smiled. Sometimes protecting the people you love means making decisions they'll never fully understand. But seeing Emma healthy and Jake radiating newlywed happiness, I knew I'd chosen correctly. Love isn't just about being present for the crises. Sometimes it's about making sure the joy stays untainted.